Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. For my old friends who know me from the testing talk I gave at React Nexus, we meet again. And for all the new friends I'm going to make today, thank you so much for coming here on a Saturday. Am I audible to all the people at the back? Am I good? Great. Thank you. Thank you. So I find the whole format of introducing the topic and then going back to the speaker and then going back to the topic a little jarring. So I'm going to start with my introduction first. I'm Sumedha. I'm a senior front-end developer at a startup called SMD. I've been with front-end for a little over 5 years. Apart from what I do at SMD, I have a lot of other interests, and I'm also the champion for browser stacks testing community here in Bengaluru. So if you all are into testing, reach out, right? So what are we going to talk about today? So we're going to talk about shipping i18n friendly libraries in React. i18n, what's that, Sumedha? So i18n stands for internationalization. What that means is, let's say you have a website. I can actually explain this better with a story, right? So once I was on my way to the office, and I'm sure all of you all can relate to this as well. So what happened was, an older gentleman picked me up in a cab, and when he arrived at my location, he sent me a message which said, "Nanu agamisidene," right? Which means I have arrived in Canada, right? So when I throughout, he was also consuming content on YouTube in Canada, right? Don't tell the Bangalore traffic cops. But essentially, what that led me to understand is how important it is to make the website, at least the ones which reach a large number of audience, internationalization friendly, right? So why libraries, why not apps is something we're going to come to, right? So let's take a look at the crowd's favorite question, like star search app, right? So I've chosen my language to be Kannada, and I've searched for search, right? So you see some of those content are in Kannada. You see there, some are in English. Why? So it's because all the content you see is app generated content. Whatever you see in Kannada is app generated content. Anything you see is user or server generated content. Yeah. So far, are you all with me so far? So let's say I'm introducing myself, right? And I'm doing it through, I have a portfolio app and I'm introducing myself. What do I say? In English, if I were to show the app in English, it says I'm from Bangalore. Notice how Bangalore is at the end. Hindi, Bangalore se hu. Kannada, Nanu Bangalore-inavanu athwa Nanu Bangalore-inavalu. So see how the positioning of Bengaluru changes in each of these things. As UI developers, how do we tackle this? Now, I have a very close friend who works for a German company, he had to build an HR values app, and team spirit was one of the values. Wrote the app in English, tested the app in English, QA complete, and then when the tester goes, when the audience in Germany go and choose this in Germany, it's a nightmare because the layout is broken. Team spirit, whatever this is, right? You see how the layout shifts make a difference. So how do we tackle this in a React app, right? So for that, what I did, I wrote a basic app because we're at Flipkart. It's a shopping app. I'm trying to shop for a t-shirt, right? And I have all of these sizes here, right? Though I do this in English, now let's say some of these content is sorry. Right. So if some of the content is user generated and some of the content is server generated, how do I make sure that this app is fully compatible, right? So let's look at the code. If I want to do it using the traditional approach, is the code visible to people at the back? Am I good? Thank you. All right. So what we will do is we would create a folder called languages within English, right? And we would have all of these object keys, or you could be doing a variation of these things, which means if I'm a developer, I go in, I write the constants for my app, which includes words like is, are, the, t, right? Whatever it could be, there are chances that it could repeat, right? So please don't review my code yet. There's a I'm getting to why it's written this way. It's not a huge monolith page per se, right? So we see I've written comments here. So we have the breadcrumb component for context. This is the breadcrumb component. We have the name, the price, the color picker, the size picker, the product details, policies, and everything. You see how many components make up this page? Now let's say there's a developer who wants to build a similar page, not same page, right? So if you go to Flipkart, there are also like different views in which you can view like a particular product information, right? So how do I ensure that whatever I write is in a way that is scalable? And it also introduces a standard. Like, what do we love as developers? We want nothing to be left to chance. We need to be told, here's the process that you can follow to get stuff done. Typically, if you had to write some sort of a hard-coded text, right? Let me just remove these two lines here. How would you write it? So if you had to create a button which says add to cart, of course, yeah, sure. Thank you for asking, right? So if I had to write a button which says add to cart, initially I start off with a button component, add to cart, and then I move it somewhere, right? Or sometimes if I raise a big PR with 15 to 30 files, this may get lost and I push in a hard-coded string into the system, right? Now, let's say I want to change this up. I want a way in which all of these messages that I have across the app has a way, like it has a process where it gets generated into how many JSON files? One JSON file, right? How can I achieve that? Now, this solves the problem of us having like multiple sources of truth. How do we make sure that we also support internationalization, right? Now, starting with, I have a code base. There are some culprits in my team who pushed hard-coded strings. I need a way to detect it. There is a i18n plugin that you can use. Don't worry, all the resources that I'm talking about in the talk is available as an article on Medium, right, that I've written. So you can use the i18n plugin, configure some settings, and anytime somebody tries to push it, you'll see red squiggly lines screaming at you, right? Now, I have created another product, right? But in another product page, but this time, the app is fine. The app is not screaming at me, right? How do I get from the first version to the second version, right? Now, let's look at the developer life cycle, right? What do we do? Develop, build, test. Develop, build, test, right? But now we have messages and we need somebody to translate it, right? How do we do that? So that JSON file we generated, we're going to generate that through CI/CD. We're going to upload the message to a service because I am fluent in, like, let's say, Kannada and English. But if you ask me to translate in German, would I be able to do it? No. Which is why I need a translation vendor. But this can't be a vendor which doesn't integrate with the systems we already have in place, right? We need everything to be automated so that as the app scales, we're able to do it, right? So how do we do it? So in order to do that, in this particular case, where I need to extract the messages, I'm going to use something called as format.js, right? What is format.js? Format.js is essentially something that helps the users generate these JSON files through a set of rules. Now, what are those rules? And how do I set it up? Let's look at the package JSON, right? So you see how I have i18n compile extract correlated with the steps that I showed you here, right? We have the extraction and we have the compilation that takes place, right? And now I'm running the extraction, I'm running the compilation, and I'm also converting it into a pseudo locale. Sumedha, you lost me. What the hell is a pseudo locale, right? So pseudo locale is essentially a way you remember the German word I told you about and how, like, if you had given a fixed height to any of your buttons, it would have broken in terms of design. You see all of these weird hieroglyphics on the screen, right? So that is a variation of English, but with hieroglyphics that is considered as a best practice in order to test an app, which is internationalization friendly, or at least it supports it, right? Now, let's go back to the product page that we had, right? So I have something called as add to cart. Here, where let me search for add, right? So this is the same button. Instead of the text, what do you see? You see a format message with add to cart, right? So what am I trying to do here is, everybody is familiar with the concept of context in React, right? So essentially what I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to take the JSON file that I had for different languages. I could have one for English, I could have one for French. I have the locale value, correct? Now I need to get the messages from the locale and give it to the context provider, and also tell it what locale am I looking for. So if I look at my entry.client file, I've written a provider. I've said, hey, here's the locale, and that locale is configurable, and I take in the messages that I need, right? This way, add to cart becomes something of a function that I'm consuming from the JSON file. Now, let's put all of this together, right? So, I'm a developer, I'm building this feature. What do I do first? I create the button. What do I do next? I have the hard-coded text, right? The next thing I do is remove the hard-coded text and define messages. How do I define messages? I define messages in this format. Let me remove this for a little bit. And I say, let the default message be add to cart, right? And you see it errors out. Why is it screaming at me? Remember how I said, as a developer, we tend to repeat messages if we have a whole JSON file and we need to do these things manually. What the system that we have here does is it generates a SHA, or a fancy way of saying it generates a key based on the string that you have. So you could have the instance of the string in many places, but the ID will be the same, which is how you avoid duplication. Now you're saying, Sumedha, how do I generate these things? I got you there too. So with the i18n setup, which I'm not going to go into deep, that we have in this repo, all you need to do is quick fix this enforce ID problem, and it generates the relevant ID for you, right? Now, what we have done, taken the hard-coded text and defined messages for it, correct? What is happening to these messages? Remember these friendly commands that we have in package JSON? When we run these commands, what we get is, so we have the app and we have the lang file, right? So within the lang, what you have here is, you remember the key that we had here? See, ADK, whatever. With the key, we generate a message. This is how you ensure that the content is not deduplicated, right? Now, what is this, Sumedha, right? So remember in the whole picture where we said we do need a translation provider, because we are not experts in that particular language, right? So there are multiple providers that we can use, right? One such provider I have used. So this is the site for format.js. So if you go into advanced, like if you go into any of these things, it will essentially tell you all of the things that we need to do. But what it doesn't tell you is how does the external provider actually come into the picture. The way it does is, let's go back to the provider. Do you see how I've added format as smartly? Yes. So this is a formatter of the translation vendor that you need to provide. So the way this works is, let me summarize what we have done so far. We've built a button component. We've written add to text as a string. We've changed that string and we've defined messages and we've consumed the messages, right? We've run the command and we've generated the JSON file. What is the next step? The next step is to send it to a translation provider, right? But if you send anything to them, will they understand? Like if backend sends you any data, will you understand what it's doing? No, there has to be a contract, right? So this is the contract that we have with SmartLink, right? You have other, so this is a paid provider. You have other free providers as well, like Localize, and there's one from Chrome as well. So you can configure the formatter here. What that does is it generates the JSON file in a way that your translation vendor can understand, right? So all of the, now you have the JSON file. You need to send it to the translation vendor. So I told you SmartLink is a translation vendor. So essentially what they do is they hire the experts in the field who are very proficient in the language, and based on the context that you give them, if you give them an en JSON file, they'll give you any language that you want. And this is a paid service, right? But they do have workflows in place where you upload the JSON file and they have webhooks which makes your the content that they generate flow back into your repository, right? So I have the language, like the JSON file, right? Now, let's say this is the translated file. So the language JSON file was the input we gave to the translation vendor. He said, okay, here's this is if this is what your content looks like in English, here's what it would look like in Spanish, in French, in German, and this is the output of that file, right? And this is the pseudo locale that I was talking about, which helps you evaluate beforehand whether your UIs are compatible with the different patterns that could arise with internationalization, right? Now, what have we done? Created a button, hard-coded text, removed the hard-coded text, defined messages, got the message to the translation vendor, got it back as a translated file, and we're here, right? How do you consume, right? So I told you format.js is what you use to generate these messages. I also told you SmartLink or any other formatter is what you can use to generate translation service. Now, how do you make your React app understand what needs to happen? How do you make sure your React knows what to map where? Which is where this package called React.intel comes into picture. All it does is it provides APIs that you can use to interact with the messages, right? So final piece of the puzzle, I take the format message from useIntel. useIntel is provided from React.intel, right? I use it, and what do? When you see add to cart, I essentially map it to message.add to cart. Now, Sumedha, when you showed me the UI, there are some dynamic content that can arise. For instance, see all 512 reviews. 512 is dynamic. How do we handle that? Right? Fear not. React.intel has got you. So all you need to do is, wherever you have see all reviews, right? You need to give the review count there. Let's see, right? So you have Format message, you pass in the review count. Because it's object map, if you have 50 keys, you pass 50 values, it will know what to do, right? So what have we covered so far? Hard-coded text, changed it to define messages, sent the messages to the translator, got the messages back from the translator, used React Intel to help React understand what to render where in cohesion with the API or dynamically generated content, right? How did we do that? We did that through providers, right? So we use the providers to provide all the context that it needs with respect to the locale. Now, let's say you have multiple apps. You need to share logic. You need to share components. What then? How do we fit translations? Which is why the talk says shipping internationalization friendly libraries, right? So I don't know how many of you all noticed, but I am not consuming, like you see, I have a apps folder and I have a packages folder. Remember when I said I got you covered? So this app is available on a public GitHub repo. All the ESLint rules I told you about are available and exported as part of this, which this app can then consume. Any Tailwind preset, because my UIs were built using Tailwind preset. So if you have 50 apps in AppWeb, you don't have to repeat the config 50 times. You export it, make it uniform, and that's how DX wins, right? It's a little things that makes DX better. Same thing with TS config. You need all of your repos to have uniform standards. So the last comes the man or the library of the hour, UI, right? So what do we have in UI? Remember this component that we have here, this tiny little guy that we have here. What I've done is, I've turned one of them into a component within the library. It's a simple React library where I'm just exporting this particular card and the translations. Sumedha, you didn't talk about the translations, right? Same deal. Define the messages, use Intel to consume the messages, right? Pass whatever dynamic data that you're getting from props, and what do you have? I've also written a story for this. Now, why is this important, right? You should, if you have and I'm sure all of you are talented engineers working with code bases which have 50,000 components. How do you see what this component does? If you go ask your senior every single time, would that fly? No, which is why we need Storybook, right? So we have a setup. Oh shit, I gave away my secret. Gets this component, right? How do I test whether this particular person has hard-coded the messages, converted the translations properly or not? You can use Storybooks in add-ons for React Intel to support a drop-down which shows English, pseudo-locale, as well as any other language you want to support. What does that mean? So if you host the Storybook anywhere, your product people can come and bug you. Sumedha, for this language, this is not working. I'm kidding. So you can actually test this app for English as well as pseudo-locales. And I'm using the same component in my product, right? So let's look at the review card where I'm using it. I'm passing these props. Translations for UI, where was it? Packages UI. Translations for web, where was it? It was in the web folder. So how are they correlated? How can I correlate or ship i18n friendly libraries in React? We saw that I was shipping translations as well along with the review card, right? So in the entry file, I import the locales messages. So it is as simple as shipping all the translations you need and getting it back and providing it to whatever consumer wants to consume, right? So let's recollect, right? Now, what is internationalization? Internationalization, and just you may or may not have requirements to internationalize your app right away. So what do you need to take away from this talk? Why did you hear me go on about 20 minutes, right? It's because, let's say you have your app just in English, right? Can internationalization be a forethought in your architecture? Can you come back, remove 50,000 messages that you had across your app to make it international? Like, imagine the effort, imagine the scale at which you need to address that problem, right? So it's always better to prematurely think through some architectural decisions. This gave you a way. Let's say we are not really internationalizing the app yet, right? But we have a framework in place which catches whether a developer is hard coding messages, right? We have a framework in place to completely convert everything through CI, right? We also have an integration provider should we need to support internationalization, should $1 million client come up to us and ask us for it, right? So, some challenges I was talking about, did I address them? Structuring. Any more hard-coded or object key-based structures necessary? No. Any repetition that will happen? No. Can you manage these things without really having an oversight while CI/CD does most of the work for you? Yes. Can you translate these things at scale? Definitely yes. Pre-compilation. What is pre-compilation? Right? So this isn't available in format.js. It's a little advanced and it's not available in format.js as default. I spun a Vite app, right? And in the Vite app, I have something called resolve. But I know it has something to do with format.js, but I also have something called resolve. So what am I trying to do here? You can do the translation two ways. You can do it when the app is being rendered, or you can pre-compile it and send it, ship it to production. In case you're not pre-compiling it, you need to have a parser. But if I'm using a pre-compiled message, when I say pre-compile, it's everything we just did. Shipping the translation JSON to production, consuming it with the provider. So all of these things are happening in a pre-compiled mode, right? So you don't need the compiler. So you can add a loop, which is a function which does nothing, right? So let's look at both the apps side by side, right? This is my app without translation. This is my app. That technically isn't the problem area. The problem area comes when I have mobile devices. I have little space. You see how this is already overflowing? Like, let's just look at side by side. Do you see the difference in the translations? Let me go down and look at the add to cart as well, right? See it? See how the height is varying, right? Can this be an afterthought to architecture? No. Anything that you have learned today, can you go and apply this to production today? Yes, right? So there we go. You now have apps. If you ship the packages UI library that is now fully compatible with the internationalization standards. While I didn't go into depth, you also have like time-related pluralization. All of these APIs are readily available in format.js as well, right? And so coming to the resources, there's a Medium article that I can share for anybody who's interested in shipping these changes to production. And as always, thank you so much for patiently listening to me go on. And that's my talk. Thank you so much. I'm Sumedha Kulkarni. You can reach out to me as Root SRK on Twitter.